Welcome to another episode of the Wild Strength Podcast. Today, my guest is Emily Valdovinos. I think that's the first time I've actually said your last name out loud. I
Perfect.
always just
Beautiful.
called you Sergeant Val. And her walk-up song is Better Hell by Bill Murray. Why is it not getting louder? It also says in parentheses that it's called Thick Boy.
Oh, yeah.
That's definitely a song that I haven't on her, but it will be first on my gym playlist when I go to the gym later.
Perfect.
Cool.
You'll love it.
Yeah, cool. I like the start of it. Like I said, this is Emily. I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then we'll get into things.
All right. Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm Second Lieutenant Emily Valdovinos, formerly known as Sergeant Val. I crossed over to the officer side in the Air Force about 3 months ago. I've worked as a strength and conditioning coach for, about 12 years now. Started out in the CrossFit space and then have kind of just kept up my strength and conditioning. Got my CSCS in 2020, I believe, 2019. And then, I've been coaching women more specifically over the last 3 years with the nonprofit Valkyrie Project. And now I kind of just am helping people out here and there whenever they ask for it.
Thank you for that. I feel like it's always funny the different people I have on here. Some people will go into like extreme depth about who they are and what they do. And then other people like you are so like humble and like, oh, I've just done like one cool thing and here's what I do. But the big reason I wanted to have Emily on here, and actually I feel like I should call you for one time Second Lieutenant Valdovinos, because when I first met Emily, we were working at Lackland Air Force Base with, then it was called like Special Warfare Prep. It's called SWIC now.
It's called SWAS now.
Oh, SWAS now, my fault.
Yeah, lots of name changes.
Yeah, it's changed a million times. And she was active duty there. I was contracted there. And I knew her and met her as Sergeant Val. And over time, we have become friends. And I don't know if I ever even told you this. You were there in like a very like kind of pivotal moment in my life, like before I left San Antonio and all of that stuff. And so like we have a meaningful friendship, and I know now, like since we live in different places, we don't get to like see or talk to each other often, but I still very much value our friendship. But Emily is a super cool person. She is a badass woman. Like she mentioned, she's a strength coach. She's strong. She just became an officer in the Air Force, which I think is super cool. It's something that she has worked very hard for, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to start with, and I kind of let you know this before we were recording, Emily joined the Air Force. Was your intent originally to go SERE, or was that going to be like a retraining thing at some point?
Yeah, it was. It was to go SERE.
So if you're unfamiliar with what SERE is Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. If you want to explain a little bit more about what that is, feel free to. And I've always kind of joked around, like if I did anything in the Air Force or in the military, that's what I would want to do, because it just seems really freaking cool. And she'll kind of talk about this. She wanted to do that and kind of just had some setbacks, but I feel like a lot of the setbacks that we'll talk about here have really propelled her to be able to do, like, I'm not going to say better things, right? It doesn't necessarily mean better, but more meaningful, fulfilling things that she's really thriving in, and I think is really cool. But talk about, I guess at first, like why did you want to go SERE, and then maybe just a little description for those who might not know what that is.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. So it's basically training air crew and flyers how to survive if they were to go down. There's a lot of other things that they do, and I think a SERE specialist should go more into depth into that. But what originally drew me to it was living in Spokane. That's where I went to high school and undergraduate. And I had worked at a CrossFit gym that was owned by a prior SERE specialist. Actually, I worked at 2 CrossFit gyms owned by SERE specialists out there, and a lot of our athletes were SERE specialists. So I was just around that world for a few years, and it seemed really fun. I knew I had wanted to join the military. I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Um, and then I found out more about the job and kind of what it entails. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So, yeah, so I enlisted in 2016, and that was my job. So I went to basic training, and then I went to SERE indoctrination, or the INDOC course, and I ended up I was injured prior, and there was an event. There was a 4 mile ruck. You have to do it under 60 minutes with 70 to 75 pounds. Um, and I was dreading that day because it's the one event that's like pass or fail. If you fail it, you're done. And I knew, like, going into it, before I had left for basic training, I had been training up, but I was like right at that 60-minute mark.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that I had nothing. I couldn't be slower than what I already was. And unfortunately, like, going through basic training and then not being able to train for those 8 weeks and then going in straight into INDOC, yeah, I busted the time cap. It was devastating. Like, I had no plan B.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I could do because I was injured. They did offer to have me redo it or go back through. Um, but something in me just told me, like, it's okay. Like, something else will come up. So I got redirected into the physical medicine technician job within the Air Force. So that's what I ended up doing instead.
Do you think that, and I don't know if I've ever asked you this or if you've ever talked about this, like you mentioned you were injured. Were you injured going into INDOC or did you get injured in INDOC?
No, so I was injured like before I joined
Oh,
the Air Force.
so you started off.
um, yeah, I was injured. It was just like this back issue that I had had for a while, and then it just, like, by not training as much, it kind of got exacerbated, and then by going to INDOC and then suddenly having to throw on a 75-pound pack. I mean, I think I weighed 130 pounds at the time. Um, it didn't do me any favors. So I kind of knew that was a possibility, that it would come up and that would happen. But it's fine. I've since recovered from that.
Yeah. Do you think so? Then my question was going to be, is that why you maybe wanted to do physical medicine, is because maybe you recognize that, like, that injury is what set you back, or was that just like, hey, this sounds fun, I'm going to do it?
So it was honestly just like the stars had aligned. My the person I was in a relationship with at the time was working at the SERE school as a water survival specialist, and he was diving with um, an orthopedic surgeon who happened to know the career field manager of the physical medicine technician career field. And so he was talking to him about my situation, and it was honestly a huge favor that they did for me. It's like, if everyone who's in the military knows, like, it's about who you know to get things done and to get some help in your career. So that's what happened. And so I didn't even know it was a job until that day. And then a couple days later, I was notified that's the career field I was going into.
And then did you have to go to, I imagine, some sort of like additional tech school for that?
Yeah, so I went through a physical therapy assistant program here in San Antonio. It was at Fort Sam. So it was a 2-year physical therapy assistant program that was crammed into 4 months. So
That's fun.
so we did, yeah, so I did that, and then graduated from there, and then went to my first base to continue, like, my follow on the job training, which was at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and then I think from there you went directly to special warfare, and that was a job that you had to, like, apply to. Was your interest in special warfare because of your experience with SERE, or was it just like that was the next challenging step for you?
Yeah, so during my time at Nellis Air Force Base, I had I had started grad school through Liberty University to start my master's in human performance and strength and conditioning. And one of the requirements was an internship. And I was trying to figure out how I could leverage my resources on base. So there was a rescue squadron, there was a SERE unit there, there was EOD. So I kind of went around and saw if like maybe I could get some hours in, get some reps in working with them, just because I had an interest in tactical strength and conditioning.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I was introduced to that world. So yeah, so I finished my graduate degree or my master's and realized like, okay, I want to pursue the tactical strength and conditioning route. Um, and from there, I was coming up on about 4 years. No, and I knew we move like probably every 4 to 5 years, anyways. So I had just emailed my career field manager, Chief Jones is his name. And I had just said, hey, like I just finished my graduate degree. I've been here 4 years. Are there any opportunities out there? And he said that there was two opening up. So there was one at Special Warfare, and then there was one at Luke Air Force Base working with the fighter pilots out there. So most of my graduate work was in pilot training, so more of like the aerospace physiology world, and I'm still super interested in all that in the flying community. But when I interviewed, they decided that I would be a better fit at Special Warfare. And I would have to say I agree. Because I got selected for that and then moved about 6 months later. And that's how I ended up at Special Warfare.
I'm curious as, and I asked this as like a female and or a woman, and the tactical space, and then the military space, and then also being like in the Air Force. And this is really just like a more personal question for me, but I'm curious because it'll kind of transition into like your work with like women specifically in training. But do you feel that like as a woman, and like this could be very specific to like your career in the Air Force or just like more broadly, um, that it has maybe been like harder for you, or have you been like generally more accepted? Do you feel like?
Hmm. I'm
Feel
trying
free to
to
answer however
figure
you.
out the best way to answer
Yeah.
this. So I think because I've had so much experience like working at a CrossFit gym with like SERE specialists, and like working around a lot of men, and then just being in the military and being, kind of the minority. I think I just grew to be really comfortable.
Mhm.
I also have a lot of friends who are like PJs and combat controllers and stuff like that. So I never felt like I didn't really fit in or anything. And I knew that I had value to add, that I could help them with their training or with their injuries or, um, and like I said, like those friendships that I've had, I felt like I understand what they do for work. I understand what their body demands of them, and their jobs. So I never felt like it was hard. Um, but I also understand how important it is to build relationships and build trust.
Mhm.
And that's with any like coaching experience that I've had. Um, and then specifically going to special warfare with all the trainees, I mean, they have to listen to me no matter what. So,
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
so they don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think that's funny. I can relate to that. I've had a similar experience. Like I feel like early on, I definitely I don't know. I'm not gonna say that I like didn't feel accepted, but it was like this internal pressure to like be less feminine as a coach, so that I felt like I was accepted and trusted, and like people would listen. Just because it is very much a male dominated field, and then you're working with like a male dominated population. But you mentioned the concept of just like the relationship stuff, and like I have learned that that is where women thrive in this setting, is because I think and I'm curious for any like men who happen to listen to this. Um, Men deeply do desire relationship, whether it's deep or surface level. And that's what I've learned specifically like with this population too, but they're afraid to a lot of the times. Or maybe they've like ran from past relationships, whether it's like family, romantic, friends, whatever, and like that is what led them to this career field. Is because they're like running from something and like they're like trying to hide it, and if someone just shows up for them to be able to like talk to them about those things, like the relationship part becomes so important. Because I've learned, and you've probably experienced something similar with students who, like you said, they're like they don't have a choice but to listen to you, but to work with you, but you still have a unique role where you can have unique conversations with them and like learn about them more than just being a student. Whereas I feel like my role as a coach was a little bit more removed from that. And so, yeah, just getting to know and like ask curious questions. And then they're like, oh, like this is interesting. There is someone who cares about me. So then I feel like when they recognize someone who cares about them, they're, I don't want to say like more likely or more willing to like want to show up, but I think it helps motivate them to like continue pushing on, because it is a really hard program to get through.
Yeah. Speaking from like the rehab side of things and like the permanent party cadre, the instructors that I've worked with, we thankfully in the setting over at Special Warfare, like we had the ability to create continuity and have that time. So there were instructors that I would see 3-4 hours a week, whereas in a normal clinic setting, we don't get that. We get like 2 30-minute sessions a week, and not a whole lot can be accomplished on a personal level, maybe from a rehab standpoint. But even then, I think having the presence there, and like I would see them work out and I would see them in the clinic, and I would, we're just constantly around each other. I think that really helps, which leads me to my next point of the Air Force is moving towards having teams of strength and conditioning coaches and physical therapists, like and athletic trainers, and a medical support team at the units for, they already have them at like special tactic units, and the rescue squadrons a little bit, which I think is so invaluable to progression. And like I said, like developing those relationships and just like having that team there to see them like all the way through, whether it's like post-surgery, post-injury, then be able to pass off from like a rehab standpoint to a strength and conditioning programming, and building from there and seeing the progress, like whether it's from a coaching standpoint or the individual that's being coached, like they can see progress happen, and it's a lot faster than if it were a normal like medical clinic setting.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think like having that, we'll call it medical support staff, but like you said, it does include strength coaches, athletic trainers, physical therapists, dietitians, some like cognitive performance specialists as well. It's interesting because I feel like I've been both at the unit level and at the like training level, and I think the goals are different. At the training level, it is like we've got to push you to your limits, and you've got to continue all this training to keep up with the demands of the training that you're going through. But then I think once they get to the unit, it's like, hey, now you've been pushed to your limits all this time throughout your training and through all your schooling or like schoolhouses and all this stuff. How can we now like slow you down? How can we, I like to use the phrase like optimize your stress, because you're going to be stressed from all the things, especially in like a special tactics unit or a special operations unit, whichever branch we're speaking of. How can we like slow you down? How can we optimize the stress that you're experiencing? And I think that is where those relationships are even more important. Because I would find in times like maybe dude's coming into the gym, he's trying to get this lift on, and I see him like maybe he's in there for like 3 hours every single day, and I also know he's doing like really intense training outside of the gym for his job. So like my thought is not how can I get this person like bigger, faster, stronger. It's let me just go talk to him and interrupt him for 3 hours. And then at the end of that, he has no clue. Like, he's like, oh, this person just came and talked to me, but now I have to go. But like, I actually ended up slowing you down and gave you like kind of a rest day, and you needed it, but you didn't know that that was what I was doing.
Yep. And I feel like sometimes there is a place for, the really heavy and the really intense training. And I'm not sure that they know that it's okay to rest, and they almost like need the permission to do so. So whether it's built in by just talking to them or educating them, I think that that's a huge piece of it too. Is just like, hey, like you'd actually probably perform better tomorrow if you did X, Y, and Z today, and then called it a day. And then being able to monitor that and see it the next day, I think is super helpful too. And if they buy in, I say buy in, but essentially buy into what you're saying, then it can provide like more longer lasting results. And I think for me, something that I try to establish is just like, how can we get you doing the things that you want to do, not only for your job, like the here and now, but also in the future, because retirement's going to come at some point. You can't, run like this for over 20 years and not pay some type of consequence. Like, that's just not how physiology works, unfortunately. So I think it's super important to try to instill that. For me, working at Special Warfare, kind of just at the very beginning, like when the trainees are coming out of basic training, like teach them how to do mobility, teach them how to calm down, relax their nervous system when they need it. So that way they can be on and firing on all cylinders when they have either training or a real life operation to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. And I would always say like it's unique being at the training level or whenever they're first getting into the military, because it's a unique time to where I think like my goal was never like we all had our fire teams and 10 to 20 people on a fire team and you've got 3 fire teams. My goal was never to have all of those people like or listen or care about what I had to say. My goal was if one person from every fire team or even one person from every class, right? Like you have X amount of people who start and then obviously the number dwindles as time goes on. If one person from every class took something away from me about slowing down, about taking care of themselves, about caring about themselves, whether it's mentally, physically, all of these things, and then they go through the pipeline, they get to their units, and then they start sharing that with people once they get to their units, like, hey bud, like it looks like you're struggling a little bit, like let's slow down a little bit. Then like that's the impact that you have to have. And I think too, as a coach, you kind of have to dial back, because I think a lot of coaches are very caring people and we want everyone to listen and we want everyone to be better and we want everyone to get stronger and care about themselves. And I say most coaches, I know some who aren't great, but most coaches are like very caring people and we want just like everyone to soak it all in. But I think if we just like take a step back and like try to really focus, like maybe there's one person who's like really kind of buying in, and I hate buy-in, but like it's just the only phrase that's coming to mind right now. If there's one person, one student, one athlete, one whomever who's really buying into you, like lean into that person as a coach, and like hopefully their peers are going to listen to them more likely sometimes than they're going to listen to us.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, buy-in to me is synonymous with trust. Yeah. And if, from a trainee standpoint, if they're all on a team and they're all, working together, like if one trusts you and they trust each other, then there's this like cool cascading effect that can happen.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I mean, and I can speak to like, there would be times where, for example, I know at prep, SWAS, whatever you want to call it now, there would be students who hated, and I'm sure this is in any training setting in any branch of the military, who didn't want to go and let anyone know that like their shoulder was bugged. It might even be like it might not even be a serious injury. But they didn't want to let anyone know that their shoulder or knee or something was bugging them in fear of like being flagged and not being able to train. And that was one thing that I really like prided myself in as a coach was like if someone on one of my fire teams came to me with that, it was like, hey, you can confide in me and like let me. I am by no means a physical therapist. I am by no means an athletic trainer, right? But like, let's talk about this and let's see if maybe we can change your movement pattern. Let's see if maybe we can change something in your training to help that feel better, so that we're still addressing the problem, but you didn't have to go to medical. But if it reaches a point, like you have to go to medical. Like I can't keep you from it. And it would have that same cascading effect. Like it'd be like, yo, I know like she's not your coach, but like go ask her and like see if she can give you some things to do for your shoulder, and then like and that I loved that because I would have students coming from I don't know who listens to these things, but like students coming from other coaches that were coming to me and they were like, hey coach, like I know you're not my coach, but like something's going on and like so and so said that like I didn't have to go to medical if I came to you. It's like that's not necessarily the case, but like let's see what we can do in the meantime, and if it is necessary you do have to go to medical. But I think just being that person for them, and like you said, yeah, it spreads like wildfire. Like they're gonna tell their teammates or whoever else is in that cohort with them or whatever that like, hey, there's this person who cares for me, and I bet that person cares for you too.
Yeah, and I think like something that I've really worked towards in my career, being both in strength and conditioning and on the medical rehab side, is just like bridging that gap to provide like the best option to keep everyone in training, to keep everyone doing what they want to do and not out of that. Because a lot of it is, I mean, from a training standpoint, training pipeline standpoint, like there's a lot of pressure and you only can miss so much. And then from an operational standpoint, you know, that's your livelihood, that's your job. So being able to combine both worlds and give the member the best possible solution for the, you know, for the best possible outcome, has been really, really rewarding and really fun. And seeing it happen, you know, day in and day out with like, you know, the thousands of students that we would see come through has been really cool.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. And what Emily didn't mention, she did say she's now second lieutenant. She went from enlisted to officer. She did that because she got accepted to the Army Baylor DPT program, which is super cool. And like two things I want to touch on with this one, and I think I've listened to you talk about this on a different podcast, but she got turned down from this program not once, not twice. It took you 3 times to get into it. So one, I really want you to talk about like just the process of like getting turned down and continuing to go after it because you knew that's what you wanted, and you knew like something in you had to have told you that it was possible, and that was why you kept going for it. So I kind of want you to talk about that. And then also, like you mentioned, the bridging the gap. And so like, why did you choose to go through this program, and why do you want to be a DPT? Like what are your goals with that?
Yeah, so originally I had tried to commission as an aerospace physiologist, which I had mentioned was what my graduate work was geared towards.
Yeah.
And it was really early in my Air Force career. I hadn't had a lot of experience. And the feedback I got was basically finish your master's degree and then try again. So after that, I went to my leadership, who was a physical therapist actually. And he was like, well, why don't you try to go the physical therapy route? And I was like, I don't know. Like I don't want to have to take more prereqs. Like I've already, you know, I'm almost done with this graduate degree. Like I just want to commission. And I really wanted the fast path. Right. But the more that I spoke with him and really immersed myself in my career as a physical therapy tech, I was like, I could do this alongside with, because what I was using was a lot of my strength and conditioning skills anyways. So so I finished up my prereqs for PT school. I had learned all about the Army Baylor DPT program, which consists of a lot of Army members, some Navy, and then a handful of Air Force every year. But I knew it was super competitive, so once I decided that was the route I wanted to go, I put everything towards creating a package to submit that they couldn't turn down, essentially. But they did. They turned me down. um, and so I just kept working and to be better, to, you know, try new things. And that's, I think, the point. Let's see, after the second time I got turned down is kind of when I started working with the nonprofit Valkyrie project, and just really working towards helping women, not only in the Air Force, but across other branches, and trying to reach as many people as I could through them, on policy reform and just women's initiatives, and just exposing kind of the deficits in training and in healthcare and things like that. So kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but all of those things to say that that's what really motivated me to keep trying. And I see physical therapists in the Air Force publishing research and being a part of like these really cool programs that are really like pioneering the way for women and for readiness as a whole within the military. Yeah. So that's kind of like my main driving factor to keep doing it. I also just knew that after being a tech sergeant in my career field, like if I was to leave special warfare, I would probably go and do a lot of paperwork and go just not really be hands-on as much with my patients. And that's what I love about coaching, and that's what I loved about my job. And I wasn't ready to take a step back from that and step into that kind of leadership role. So I knew that commissioning was something that I really wanted to do, and best case scenario would be to get my schooling paid for and then continue on that way.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. So you mentioned also like your work, your passion and work for like wanting to help women. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, like weren't you like a mentor for the women who were coming through the pipeline as well?
Yeah, I was. So my role was female support cadre,
Okay.
and that was just to provide resources and any information about anything for the women coming through the pipeline. So through that, I was able to really reach a lot of amazing female candidates that came through and help them out, whether it was, to help them with their pull-ups, or if they needed certain medical resources, or just someone to talk to because they were just one of
200.
one. One female out of 200 guys. Like it, whether or not they realized that type of stress and pressure, they had me there to kind of offload that and like help them get through it, and as well as like a resource for the men. Like I had a lot of the male trainees come to me like, how do I integrate with a female on my team? I've never done this before. I don't know. I've never lived with a woman that wasn't my mom. I've never, been around a girl who's stronger than me, who's faster than me, or, things like that. So that was a really cool opportunity for me to see that, and like for them to express that vulnerability and talk to me about that was really cool.
Yeah, I think that's cool. And I actually never thought of it from that perspective, but like it's really cool to hear and to know that guys were coming to you about that. Because like you said, and like I think I mentioned kind of earlier in the conversation, is like a lot of men just don't care enough. I'm not going to say like there are women who don't care about these things too, right? So like no kind of like discrimination here, but I just feel like the specific kind of personalities that are drawn to that career field, they're very much like laser focused on just getting through and like not really concerned with anything else that's going on, which like, and that's oftentimes why these folks succeed in this career, because that's how they are. But it's cool to know that they cared enough to come and ask you or anyone really like, hey, there's this woman on my team that I have to be supportive of. And maybe they haven't had like great relationships with, like you said, maybe the only relationship with a woman they've ever had is with their mom. And maybe that was a very negative relationship that they had with their mom. And now they are sleeping next to another woman in the same room. And for those who aren't aware, it's not like they're sharing a bed. There's different beds. It's just the way that the room is set
Yeah,
up. And they
yeah,
have to,
it's like an open bay.
right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not, they're not
Yeah.
all sharing the same bed. Um, but like, and then you are on the same team with them. You have to work with them, and teamwork is a huge part of being successful in this pipeline and this career field. So it's really cool to know that they were coming to ask that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think my experience from being on a team, when I went through the first portion of SERE was like how I handled being the only female on the team,
Yeah.
and how I could offer that perspective. Obviously, not from like I mean, it was only a couple weeks that I experienced that, but taking that and really trying to instill like how important it is to be a part of the team and to contribute what your strengths are and to be upfront with what your weaknesses are or your vulnerabilities. I don't really like the word weakness. um, but we all have them, right? Like we're not all 100% at everything. And I think for me to walk into when I was on my team and like be humble enough to know and to let them know up front, like, hey, we're probably going to get smoked after this run because I can't run as fast as you guys.
Right. Yeah.
And like, and like they probably hated me for it, at the time, but if they knew what to expect and
Right.
kind of help me with that, like I would literally have people just like pulling me along, like pushing me and like encouraging me,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that we all wouldn't have to suffer as much at the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's super cool. And then you also mentioned briefly, maybe like in your introduction, your work with Valkyrie, and that is a nonprofit that seeks to like help women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've talked to you a little bit about it before. It's not just in strength and conditioning. I know you were kind of overseeing their programming, which you could speak to that as
Mm-hmm.
well. But like policy reform too, and I think just like overall accepting women in the military, but even more so in like these special warfare, special operations roles. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep. Yeah. So last year, well, this will be the third year coming up that Valkyrie Project is hosting the Military Women's Symposium.
Mhm.
It's in Washington, D.C. in March 2025, for those of you who are interested. But last year, I was able to go and be there, and it was about, I mean, the panels and like everybody who spoke was absolutely amazing and incredible and brilliant. And I was so moved by them and hearing like the issues that people have that these women have gone through and the initiatives and like actually putting like a dollar amount to how much money we need
Yeah.
to work on these things and to change them. um, so yeah, so just getting with other like countries even and their militaries and like
Mhm.
explaining like how we do things or how we want to do things and like what would be better for the force as a whole. And it starts with recruiting and making sure that we are maintaining health like throughout the lifespan. And obviously women are able to most are able to have children, and then the effects of that and how we can keep women in the military and keep them healthy, um, and keep them in those jobs. So like pilots and like
Mhm.
the upcoming operators that are going to be in those career fields. So how do we sustain that and how do we optimize it?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of you know really good ideas, and there's a lot of information, and there's a lot of research that still has to come out to
Yeah.
support it. um, which I mean, that's just in women's health, even like across like sports. I'm sure like a lot of people have heard that there's just not a lot of research done on women, for a variety of reasons. But so that's what we're trying to do, is help fund those research projects. And I say I'm actually not a part of Valkyrie Project anymore. I'm just adjacent, just because of my life and starting school soon. I had to take a step back, but I'm still heavily involved with them, and I love them very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That kind of leads into like another thing that I wanted to talk about is I think the support of women being in these roles starts at a recognizing the differences, the physiological differences between men and women. And there are
Mm-hmm.
very vast differences. And I think it's important to understand that. I think a lot of people want to come from the perspective of, like, shoot, I mean, a lot of people think that women can't do these roles, right? And my perspective has always been like, if a woman is training to optimize her physiology to be able to be strong enough, to be fast enough, to be able to be smart enough, because there's a cognitive aspect of all of this as well, then like she very well can do that job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for example, if you have just some random woman on the streets who's never trained before, like we would get kids who were 18 fresh out of high school who've played video games all of their life and they've never
Yep.
trained. Like now that's not to say that like it might be a little bit easier for a male who's never trained before than a female who's never trained before. But I think if we are preparing these women for these roles, they very much can be fit for these roles and can do these roles. So then I
Right.
guess go into, if you can and if you're comfortable or want to, and whatever you're comfortable or like whatever you're familiar talking about, what does it take for a woman to do this role, to do so? And this, by this role, I'm talking specifically like in special warfare and special operations, because it is more of like a physically demanding role than any other one in the military. What does it take for a woman to be able to be good at this? And I have to imagine that starts like with their training and the training differences.
So I think it truly actually starts with the desire to want to do the job.
Mm, true. Okay. That's hard.
Um, so the the desire and the drive and their motivation to want to be in one of these combat roles, I think, needs to be greater than anything.
Mhm.
Because mentally, like, they have to know what it's going to take to do the job from a mental standpoint,
Mhm.
and not just like the actual job, but then to get through the training pipeline, which is, I mean, I've seen for like pararescue, it can take up to 3 years, if not longer, with waiting for courses or getting washed back or, medically, like, and I'm talking about like a healthy male who has gone through everything first try. I mean, it's over 2 years for
Yeah, it's a
sure.
long
So
process.
so mentally, that, and then your training age, I think having a good baseline as a female, having a good baseline in sport, um, whether it be like weightlifting or soccer or something that has helped them with their bone density, I think is like a really, really good place to start. We had a candidate come through, gosh, a year and a half ago. And I actually knew her from back home, and she was like a swimmer, and she was an Olympic weightlifter, and she was a little bit older. I don't know exactly how old she was, but she wasn't like 18 years old.
Hmm.
So having that foundation, what is going to be like probably your best chance at staying healthy through the training. Not to say that everyone has to have that background, but starting out with good body composition,
Hmm.
meaning, your body weight is at least 150 pounds, because from some of the research that has come out of special warfare, it showed that anybody, male or female, under 150 pounds, like their risk for injury goes up. So that was kind of like the baseline. So if you're a female that's under 150 pounds, not to say that it's impossible, but there is a higher increased chance for injury. Um, Body composition obviously goes into it. Like, the more muscle mass you have, the stronger you're going to be able to withstand the load carriage. Um, and then also having, like, I would say, like a year and a half to 2 years minimum of consistent progressive overload training, strength and conditioning, like run, to include running, um, rucking, and consistently lifting, would be, I think, like a really good place to start. So with those things, so mentally being resilient enough to prepare for a really long, hard training pipeline, and just that good foundation.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up, and I really like that you said that. Like, you think first I would start with like their resiliency and their grit and their like desire to want to do it. Because I think for with men too, but I think for women, when you maybe get into it and see the significant differences between you and the other guys that you're training with, that can be like detrimental is the word that's coming to my mind, but I just meant it can take a toll on you like mentally, right? Like you know what you're capable of, you know you're capable of doing what you need to do for this training, but you and a lot of times you have guys like who just want to go above and beyond, and that's okay too, right? Like you have your minimums that you need to pass these tests, and if you're getting past that, and even if you're going beyond that, that's okay too, right? But I think it can be very like mentally draining for women to just be around a bunch of testosterone and like even more so like men who just probably don't even care about her being there. But then you said like you brought up the point of it might be a 2 to 3 year pipeline, but you're also have to take in advance the like 2 to 3 years before you ever even start that are arguably more important than in the pipeline. Like yes, you need the mental resiliency and grit to get through that 3 years of training. Um, but are you willing to be patient enough to take the time to prepare in advance? And I think that's where a lot of people maybe, I don't want to say lack the knowledge, but like you can have as much mental resiliency in the world and go into BMT without ever having really trained much to prepare for it. But like, what is the likelihood? And there might even be an actual statistic to that, but like, what is the likelihood that you're going to get through it?
Right. Yeah, and I think that recruiting, it needs to start with recruiting, in an intentional way, in a realistic way, to
Mhm.
tell, all members coming in, not just the military, but specifically for special warfare, um, that, yeah, the minimum requirement to join special warfare is the initial fitness test, which, if you aren't familiar, it's push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a run. Um,
And there's a swim too, yeah.
and a swim, yes, sorry. But it's so, I think that the physical entrance test needs to have like a ruck and have some other factors, and not just that, because I do think that a lot of people can pass that initially, um, but there has to be another, they need to take it a step further, and really, not, I don't want to say weed out, but be more selective about
Yeah.
that and like the initial entrance requirements. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot that could be done, but again, it starts with recruiting
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really trying to get the best people for those jobs.
For sure. No, I would agree. And I think too where, and this is not even just with like special warfare, I think recruiting fails in that like the military just wants the numbers, no matter what the branch is. They just want the numbers. And I would oftentimes hear that this is not what my recruiter told me. Or like my recruiter didn't tell me this was going to happen, or my recruiter didn't tell me this was going to be this hard, or this and that. And like you said, it starts with recruiting and making sure they know what they're getting themselves into physically, mentally, like all that it's going to take. But I think also being real and honest, and like maybe it is in recruiting, but I think also in the people who are already in the field, if they go on podcast or anything, to be more public facing, to talk about like, hey, you have to be prepared for this, and if you aren't prepared, like have a recruiter tell you like, hey, you're not prepared for this, and be honest, don't just do it for the numbers. That way you can have better retention and have people actually getting through the pipeline and passing the pipeline. But so I guess, yeah, a bigger question is, so you have a man and a woman, and like, I'm interested in how would you prepare a female differently than a male going into this?
Yeah, so let's say they're at a similar training age, relatively, like their muscle mass is about the same. I would, I mean, women just like we have smaller lungs, we have smaller hearts, we have to work a little bit harder
Mhm.
on our anaerobic and aerobic capacity. So I would train them honestly the same. I would ask probably more questions to the female of like, hey, like, do you get a period? Like, okay, like, what are your symptoms like around that time, or just like throughout the month? Like, what does it look like for you? Because our hormonal cycles are on average about 28 days long, whereas for males they're about 24 hours long. um, so there are some considerations there, and that's where I would start. I would ask more. I would ask them both the same questions. Obviously, wouldn't ask the guy the same things, but you know, get into like their sleep hygiene, get into how much they're eating, and then I would change things from there, and it would be more like auto regulated for the individual,
Mhm.
um, rather than like individualized, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
So
I think because I think a lot of people want to say, and the reason I asked is a lot of people want to say that like, yeah, the women should be trained differently, like vastly differently, right? Like, oh, women have different training needs than the men. But I think taking, like you said, you take all things into consideration, the menstrual cycle, hormonal cycle, all these kinds of things. The training really isn't different, and that's where like, and to add another perspective to that, it's yes important to take those things into consideration, but she's not going to get any different training when she gets into the pipeline than the guys are getting.
no.
So you might even be doing a disservice if you did something completely different.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are, I mean, it depends on what the person's weakness is. So, like, if, I mean, females do, by design, we have less muscle mass in our upper bodies, but that doesn't mean that it can't be trained to be equal to or better than, your male counterpart. Um, but if, as a coach, like, if I know that, then I'm going to, both people are going to do, pulling, train, like strength training for pulling, but the female might just need to do a little bit more or do something
Mm-hmm.
different, a little different. So, like, to say that everybody's going to do the exact same thing is just like unrealistic in any population that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And to have, the knowledge as a coach of like, okay, like, I'm going to give her 10 extra reps of eccentric pull-ups
Mm-hmm.
on, twice a week. And it doesn't have to be like known to everybody. Like, if you just tell them what to do, like, that's good coaching.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be like stated that it's different, because it's not. The goal is the same. The goal is to
Mm-hmm.
build, you know your pull-ups, for that person's pull-ups. So how are we going to get there? And it does look different for everybody. And then there's also like, same with like rucking, for instance. Like, women just have like shorter legs typically, so but they also have like more musculature, or can have more musculature, and like the way that their like body composition is is
Mm-hmm.
is more in their lower bodies, which could benefit them more so than like a really tall, like leaner male potentially. So I think just like, as a coach, leveraging what the person in front of you, agnostic of their gender, what they have to work with,
Mm-hmm.
I think is like the most important thing.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and yes, there might be outside of training, like specifically for um, a pipeline or anything like that, just like training in general. But really, like you said, this is what coaching is like finding out the individual needs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
male or female, and having an understanding. Like you said, women typically have more of their muscle mass and their lower body. So where can we take advantage of that in this training, and how can that play to your advantage when we're preparing you for this? Versus like men can be way stronger in their upper body, so like that's something that we can change. And I think, man, that just brings up like the whole like social media fitness influencer type stuff and the like one size fits all approach. And I think so, and I know that Special Warfare even came out with like a training program leading up to BMT. And correct me if I'm
Mm-hmm.
wrong, it's like a one size fits all type approach. And that's not even just to say that like the women can do that, but there's probably things that the men doing it need differently too. And so, like you said, that's what coaching is, understanding the individual differences, and you can still, and that was even like whether you're working with a sports team or whether you're working with a whole unit or a team in a unit or just like a small fire team in the training setting, that like here is my general program for everyone that I'm working with, and then understanding, like you said, gender, their weaknesses, their strengths, all of those things. And then now individually, when I'm looking into this, what changes can I make for this individual person, and how can I address them in a way that's like not really evident to everyone else. Like no one wants to stand out, right? Everyone's like, oh, if I'm working with a team, like I want to be doing what the team is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think an additional layer to that coaching is like, how can I communicate with this person that like this is going to be a little different for you, it's going to serve a better purpose for you, and you're going to be better in the end because of it, but I don't want you to feel singled out because of this change that I made for you too.
Yeah, truthfully, if I was like coaching a whole group of people and there was one female that did need to work, I would just make everybody do the same thing, and nobody would know the difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think
And they're getting extra reps, she's getting her extra reps, and no one knows the difference. Which is like was something that I had brought up to some of the coaches at Special Warfare of like, if we did provide a more like, I don't want to say inclusive, but if we did address some of those like the known weaknesses that the females coming through have, so like grip strength being one of them, that's across the board for, as you know, like we've talked about it, um, grip strength for males and females, like let's just add more grip work in, and that way all the bases are covered. So same thing with any of the other things. um, it's just hard to do that. It's hard to create, as you know, like you can't create a single program that's going to work for everybody.
mm-hmm.
But what I can appreciate is that Special Warfare, like the coaches that were in my flight that had worked on this program, is like they did address as much as they possibly could to give a product that at least gets you started.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you follow that program, I think it's like a 16-week program, and then you have that baseline, you come into Special Warfare, and then you get the coaching, like with all the expertise and
Mm-hmm.
um, all of that. Once you get through to the pipeline, then I think that's where like the reforming and like more of the individualization can happen, especially like you had mentioned, like you having a fire team. I don't know how many people were on your team, but I know it's like what, 8 to 12 members.
Sometimes
I
more,
think
sometimes
that's,
less, just depending on the size of the class and like what the coaching
yeah,
availability was.
and I think that's super reasonable to be able to make those adjustments,
Mm-hmm.
um, by getting to know your people.
Oh, for sure. I'd agree. And I think I'd add another layer to that. It is very reasonable. Like, that is a reasonable sized group to get to know everyone and to make the adjustments. I think also the concept of like being a knowledgeable coach and knowing that you have to do those things, or not, or have, I don't want to use that word, you don't have to, but you should. Knowing like when to address those problems and when to make changes for the individual versus just sitting back, knowingly being like, well, this really isn't working for this person, but I'm checking boxes.
Right.
Which, that's unfortunate that like there are coaches that are like that, but I also think in this field specifically, those people get weeded out pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Yeah.
found more than anything, oh, what is it? What is the guy? Chris Meyer, I believe is his name. Like, he did a book, and instead of calling it like tactical strength and conditioning, it's the human weapon system, because we're working with
Yeah.
humans.
Yep.
And so I think more than anything, when when coaches are approaching it from working with a human and we're taking all things into consideration. Not only are we being the best coach that we can be, but we're creating better humans and operators and human weapon systems that we could possibly create, versus it being very transactional and you have a coach who knows everything and they're just like pouring all of that into one person and not making any changes. But I think that's been my favorite part of working like in the tactical side of things, is that you generally get better people that you're working with, because if your peers or your coworkers aren't going to weed you out, if you're at a unit, those guys are going to weed you out. Like, they're going to have complaints about you.
I think, everybody, at least who I've worked with, like all volunteered to be in the military. They all volunteered to be there. They want to be there. Most are highly motivated, like great candidates to do well. And I feel like it's, as like support staff, like our job to make sure that we're giving them the best chance to succeed and be healthy, like whether it works out at special warfare or not, for them to go on into the rest of their military career and their life being sturdier and better than they were before they joined.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. Well, we are coming up on an hour here. I haven't had like a conversation on training in the podcast in a really long time. So I feel like I could just go on forever and ever, because sometimes it's like, I mean, yeah, it brings me back to, or not back, I still work in this field. But yeah, I think it's cool. And I end all of my episodes the same, but kind of before that, like, I don't know, I think people always ask me, like, why do you do the podcast? What is it for? What does it mean? And I've had a couple of conversations now that aren't really related to, like, hunting or the outdoors, or I've even had one that, like, wasn't even really related to training either. And I'm like, the beauty of it is that I can make this, like, whatever I want it to be, and just, like, kind of have really cool conversations. So yeah, it was really cool to just kind of have another conversation on here about like training, and I'm glad that you were able to come on. I feel like we've been trying to like make it happen for a while now, and just like schedules don't ever align, and I wanted to make sure that I got you before you started school again, because I know you'll be super busy, but I'm excited for you. Emily, I end all of my episodes asking my guests, what does wild strength mean to you? And you can take that literally or figuratively or whatever, but when you think of wild strength, what comes to mind?
I think of, like, in its rawest form, like having the humility to just be who you are, like with all the shame or the what you're proud of, what you're least proud of, like just showing up as authentically as you are. That takes a lot of strength to do, and to share that with the world, because a lot of people hide the ugliest parts of themselves. And they want to showcase everything that is beautiful and shiny and sparkly about them. And personally, like, that's not what I want to see. Like, yeah, I want to see those things too, and like you should be proud of what you've accomplished, but I think to truly understand and to know people, like you have to see those parts too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that was still your answer, despite that being like absolutely nothing that we talked about. Because I think I mentioned when we started this that like Emily was just there in like a kind of pivotal time in my life and in my career. And just like we have such deep, vulnerable conversations sometimes. And I love that about her. And I love having people in my life that can do that, that can have those conversations. But if people like are curious, if they want to know more about what you're doing, if they just find you to be the most interesting person in the world and they want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I have Instagram. My handle is at coached by M. So I'll give you that so you can post it as well. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me, is on Instagram.